So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the NETmundial+10 recap webinar. There are still people joining the room, so we will give them a few more moments and please stay on the line. There are still people joining the room, so we will give them one more minute and then we will start the webinar. So please stay on the line. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the NETmundial+10 recap webinar. My name is Lars Steffen. I'm head of International Digital Infrastructures and Resilience at ECO, Association of the Internet Industry, and I'll be your host today. For today's webinar, we have, I think, a great lineup of speakers. They are all members of the high-level executive committee of NETmundial. So today we have an alphabetical order. Jordan Carter, he's speaking for the technical community, and he's with ORDA, the Domain Administration of Australia. Lise Fuhr will join us later. She's still on a late train. She will speak for the private sector. She's from the Ethno Association. Also with us is Jeanette Hoffmann. She's co-chair of the committee, and she's with the WZB Berlin Social Science Center. Also with us is Anna Neves. She's speaking for the intergovernmental organizations from the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. And last but not least, Bruna Martins dos Santos for the civil society from the Digital Action from Brazil. Before we start the webinar, here are some housekeeping rules. So this webinar, of course, will be recorded. The recording will be available after the meeting. You're muted throughout the webinar. You can submit questions anytime via the questions pod on the right-hand side of your screen. You have the GoToWebinar dashboard where you can also submit questions, but you can also raise your hand by clicking the raise your hand button, and then we will unmute you, and please state your name and your affiliation before you ask a question. And after the webinar, you will see a short survey of how you like the webinar. And if it was useful for you, and it's also always useful for us, if you could provide feedback to improve our webinar services. The next webinar that I would like to recommend to you is on the 26th of June, where we have a readout webinar on the ICANN meeting that is taking place next week in Kigali. And 2 weeks later, we will provide a summary also with different speakers from the different constituencies at ICANN to provide a short and brief summary of what has happened in Kigali. And with this, I would like to dive into substance. And the first speaker is Jeanette Hoffmann, and she will provide a brief introduction on what NETmundial actually is and on the processes. And please give me a moment because I will put up her slides.
Should I perhaps start? before you get the slides going? They're not that important anyway. They just illustrate what I'm supposed to.
Yes, please.
Okay, in order to understand NETmundial+10, it is perhaps good to sort of recapitulate what NETmundial in 2014 was about. NETmundial 2000 in 2014 was a, if you want, governance response to the revelations by Edward Snowden in 2013. As you may remember, Edward Snowden exposed a mass surveillance program by the American NSA, which sort of captured basically all data flying over the internet and using it to spying not only on American, but also other users, and among them also governments. And there was a response to these revelations. The Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, gave a very powerful speech at the UN in New York, basically saying that this was absolutely unacceptable what the NSA was doing, and that it was about time to sort of formulate rules that would define the do's and don'ts of the internet, how to use it and how to not use it. And Dilma Rousseff understood this job as actually a multilateral task. She thought that governments should come together and define rules for using the internet. And that again brought a very strong response from what was at that time called I-STAR organizations, among them ICANN, the RIRs, and other organizations. And they, I think, headed by Fadi Shehazeh, the CEO of ICANN at that time, they sort of tracked to Brazil to talk to Dilma Rousseff and convince her to instead organize a multi-stakeholder conference with exactly that task, to define rules for the internet. Next slide. So in spring of 2014, there was a multi-stakeholder conference taking place in São Paulo at exactly the same space as the NETmundial+10 meeting, to define internet governance principles and a roadmap for the future evolution of internet governance. And these principles that were part of the outcome of NETmundial again formed the basis for the NETmundial+10 meeting in 2024. Before we turn to that, it makes sense to also look briefly at the approach that NETmundial developed, because it was also for internet governance standards at that time quite a step forward. Next slide. So NETmundial started by forming a high-level committee just as the 2024 meeting did. It had an online consultation to discuss a draft document, and at the NETmundial meeting proper, there were negotiations taking place over 2 days. And what was really new about that approach is that governments, civil society, the technical sector, the private sector, and academia really sat together to agree on documents. What was new is that the governments also agreed to this document and thereby gave it a nearly official status. That hadn't happened before, at least in the internet governance sector. So this is why the NETmundial outcome represents something new in terms of agreeing on principles, processes, and rules. Next slide. So NETmundial+10 followed a similar process. It started with a scoping group in the autumn of 2023, where different stakeholders discussed the sort of possibility of having a +10 meeting. Then there was issued in early 24 a joint statement by CGI, the Brazilian organization that also was responsible for the first meeting, where they sort of lined out the meeting that would take place and defined a rough purpose, which consisted in sort of working on the principles, the NETmundial principles, and formulating, if you want, practical proposals and benchmarks for assessing multi-stakeholder approaches and giving practical advice of how these principles could actually be implemented in a better way than before. Then there was a public consultation taking place in March 2024. A preliminary version of an outcome document was published shortly before the meeting, and in April this year, the NETmundial+10 meeting took place. And with that, I hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. And yes, as you just mentioned, one of the essential parts of pillars of the NETmundial is the high-level executive committee. And with this, I would like to ask Anna, what is the role of the committee and what are its tasks and how it was actually created?
You need to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, it will be good, yes. So the first time I heard about NETmundial+10, the possibility to have this gathering to rediscuss, to reflect on the role of the different stakeholders was in September, actually, when I was in São Paulo. And then the idea was very well discussed, I think, by CGI.br during the IGF in Kyoto, and then during ICANN. And so they had several bilateral meetings with all the stakeholders to perceive the interest of all the community, to rediscuss, reflect on the different, on the role of the different stakeholders in all these movements, because we knew that WSIS plus 20 will take place in 2025. Open consultations towards that high-level ministerial meeting are undergoing. But this idea of the Global Digital Compact was really disturbing all the stakeholders, because we are still waiting to see what will be its effect on the WSIS plus 20 and on the role of the Internet Governance Forum. So this idea helped different stakeholders to understand that it will be really good to put everyone together, or to have the community to discuss and to have all these stakeholders together again, to see how we could discuss together a statement, something that will be the outcome of this work of different stakeholders. So CGI.br, what they did was to create a focus group in the beginning. So this focus group worked throughout December to think on the structure of what could be a NETmundial+10. And so from the focus group, it was discussed all the processes that should start, and how it could shape the meeting, etc. And so it was asked to the focus group members to propose members of the community to become members of this high-level executive committee that was thought by the focus group that is the best way to proceed, because we had so short time to do anything effective until April. Then in January, there was some proposals for some members to be part of the HLEC, HLEC. So HLEC stands for High Level Executive Committee. And so it was a thought that, of course, it should be we should have members of each stakeholder group, including intergovernmental organizations, and they should be we should have members from each region, of course. So that's it was a difficult task. So some members of the focus group proposed some persons to be part of the HLEC, and then the CGR.br decided to see who could better represent or would have the time, because it was very consuming in terms of time until March, April, and so we they try to see what kind of members would be available to have this commitment in such short notice. Members from all these regions, from different stakeholders, and so the HLEC was formed like that. And at the end, I think that it was achieved a good balance of each region of the world, of each stakeholder group, and I think that now it's time for Bruno to talk about the dynamics of the different stakeholders in the HLEC. Thank you.
Yes, Anna, thank you very much. Yes, Bruna, we just learned that the committee consists of various stakeholders groups that's very diverse. So how does the work actually look like? So what are the dynamics? What are the similarities, but maybe also the differences in this group? Because when so many different perspectives and stakeholders come together, it's probably a lively discussion.
Thanks, Lars, and thanks a lot for the invitation. Happy to be here as well. I think in the general sense of the debate and how the work evolved, there were far more similarities than differences, and that's the main point I would like to highlight here, right? The 2024-2025 biennium is really seen as this pivotal moment, right, for the future of the space as well as the multi-stakeholder approach. And we're seeing a lot of meaningful processes taking place with this +20, SSTD, preparation for the IGF mandate renewal, GDC and Summit of the Future, and also NETmundial+10. And I think that what made us all come together, as Anna was saying, and really gather people that had the time and had the space to invest some time to NETmundial and the initiative was really the willingness to make things happen and to come up with a really good and relevant outcome for this, right? From the very beginning, we agreed that we wanted a relevant outcome and we wanted something that would be able to weigh in on some of the ongoing processes instead of being just a detached kind of initiative, right? And a lot of us had this kind of collective evaluation of a so-called slightly more difficult time in internet governance, or maybe that there were some challenges going on that would allow for some duplication of the discussions or even fragmentation of what we have learned and what we have been protecting as the multi-stakeholder approaches and also these spaces. And I think in terms of the dynamics, really, it went super well. Each of our groups or each of the representatives of the stakeholder groups tried to do as much consultation back and forth with our peers, right, in our communities as much as we could. And I can speak a little bit more, perhaps, as the civil society, about the civil society group, as just like the other ones, we try to come up with a technical or like a a more technical or coordination meeting ahead of the event, just so we could do a back and forth between some of the positions to the HLEC and some of the HLEC discussions into the community group, in order to feed both groups. But I maybe just highlighting a little bit more on the civil society position. I think some of the things we defended there that also echoed within some of all the other groups would be the need to focus on inclusivity, transparency, and accessibility, and those three values being kept at the very core of the processes, spaces, and discussions as essential components of everything that have been debating throughout NETmundial and also in other spaces, and also the need to avoid a direct or indirect exclusion of key stakeholders, and also to reinforce a more robust participation or more robust participation options throughout visa, but also in travel options, but also on the capacity building that would be dedicated to a lot of stakeholders. And maybe just to wrap up, I do think that a lot of those ideas and questions and debates that were ongoing through our communities really were highlighted in the final document and in the new statement, right? As it states that internet governance and digital policy processes, they more than ever require unprecedented coordination and cooperation among stakeholders to effectively unlock the benefits of this massive transformation for everyone. And I really think this was the core of our work. Everyone was willing to collaborate. Everyone was willing to bring in new perspectives and even points of criticism, right? And even if there were, let's say, disagreements within the group, we were very keen and compromise and sorting those things out just so we had something that was balanced. And as just to wrap up, as a parliamentarian that I used to work with, says a lot in Brazil, like whatever he's aiming for a more multi-stakeholder approach in policy making or a law writing process, then he would say that it really means that everybody leaves the room unsatisfied. But I don't really think it's that. It just really feels that someone had to compromise something else in order for the final results to be a balanced one. And I really feel that this was the compromise we had. Everyone was willing to discuss and let go of one or two perspectives so we could arrive within the HLEC at a balanced outcome and statement. Thanks a lot, Lars.
Thank you very much, Bruna. And I don't see any other speaker is raising a hand to disagree. And with this, I would like to now move on to Lisa. And Lisa is currently still traveling, so I hope that the audio will work. And the question for you, Lisa, if you can respond to this, is many people are monitoring what is going on in the internet governance space, but for those who are not doing this on a regular basis and not on a very in-depth level, can you maybe give us a brief insight on what is the relationship between NETmundial and other fora and processes like the Internet Governance Forum, for example, and why do you think that NETmundial is needed in this ecospace of internet governance work streams and fora?
Thank you, Lars. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and sorry for a bit of background noise.
Thank you for taking the time during travel. So this is much appreciated.
Yes, no worries. Okay. I think it's a very good question because there is a lot going on right now. We have, of course, the NETmundial just been done, and in the horizon we have WISES coming up next year. We had a meeting last week with the WISES, but the WISES summit is coming up in 2025. We also have the Global Digital Compact and the Summit for the Future that the UN Secretary General is working on. But to me, the Internet Governance Forum, which has been going on for since 2006, I think it's extremely important, the relationship between the NETmundial and Internet Governance Forum. I'm also on the leadership panel, just for full disclosure, where I'm working on with others to secure the funding, to look into improvements, and also just seeing what can be done to strengthen the IGF. There is no formal relationship between the IGF and NETmundial, but there is a lot of links. So, for example, one thing was that Shengeta Masango, the head of the IGF Secretariat, was in the high-level group, shows that there is an interest in keeping that link with the IGF. IGF has also been mentioned positively both in the first NETmundial statement but also in the NETmundial+10. And to me, the NETmundial and the link with IGF is that the NETmundial+10 we did and the statement we did was very much focused on the process and the working methods and how to strengthen the multi-stakeholder model as such. So IGF doesn't have the monopoly on the multi-stakeholder model. That's for several internet governance organizations and hopefully also other organizations. So IGF can use the recommendations of the NETmundial and use the statement to improve. And I think both IGF and NETmundial are changing our focus from both being only internet focused into more digital ecosystem focus. And that's a bit back to my hopeful thinking that the multi-stakeholder model will be much more expanded and used in other forums than only IGF and NETmundial or ICANN and other internet bodies. I think it's important also the shift we saw that in the first NETmundial it was very much on internet. Now it's also digital policy and processes in the understanding that internet has grown and it's much more than just an internet focus. I hope we as a leadership panel will make sure that the statement is taken into account when we look at the IGF recommendations. And I also hope that the framework we're building, we have the internet we want that has been out in a consultation and will be also in a multi-stakeholder process developed further. We should take the NETmundial statement into this part of the work also, because that linkage and the interdependence of NETmundial, Internet Governance Forum, but also the more top-down government-led, like WSIS and others that are intergovernmental for us. I think it's important we have a forum like the NETmundial where we build on a strong structure for the multi-stakeholder model. So to conclude on this, I don't see any formal links between the NETmundial+10, but there are a strong relationship. And I think due to the nature of the two events and their scope, it's important that we recognize that and use that as a tool to strengthen the multi-stakeholder model further, not only in IGF, but hopefully also in other parts of the world. And if we can have a bit more multi-stakeholderism also in the Global Digital Compact, that would be ideal. I know it's not going to happen that way, but just to push for it is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you for explaining the relationships or the non-relationships between all those different fora. And you already touched upon the results, and this leads us to Jordan, because Jordan will take us through the guidelines that have been produced at NETmundial. don't be afraid. He won't read out the full slides, and they are just there to be complete. And when we share the slides after the webinar, that you have all the information at hand. But now the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lars, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, joining some fellow MAG colleagues, Berna and Lisa and so on, and also obviously all HLEC members. It's a little bit of a curious thing to present these guidelines because there's quite a lot of text, and as Lars said, I promise I won't read them to you. But I think the point comes back a little bit to what Lisa was saying just recently, that the digital policy processes reference was about saying that the original Tunis agenda on internet governance was a very broad-based one. But sometimes when people are talking about internet governance, they think it just means the narrow technical focus. So it doesn't. It was very, very clear the Tunis language around development and application by governments, private sector, civil society, in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. And so that's clearly a very broadly based thing, which is why forums like the IGF are incredibly broadly based and have a hugely diverse agenda. But we wanted people to be clear that that was what we were talking about in the NETmundial+10 work. So that's where the framing around internet governance and digital policy processes came from. So more contemporary language to say essentially the same thing. And a key output of the event was this set of multi-stakeholder guidelines, which was designed to kind of distill the essence of and the experience of multi-stakeholder internet governance processes and kind of offer them up to the policymaking community, and particularly to some of the governmental and intergovernmental and multilateral processes that have been going on, to say, look, you can do a better job of involving stakeholders, and here is a playbook for how to do so. And also to give a kind of common reference point for those who are already working in multi-stakeholder forums, to have a set of criteria and process steps to assess them and probably to improve them. So, as an example, an organization like ICANN that claims it's got a multi-stakeholder model and does, could probably think through some improvements to its model if it worked through these guidelines in a systematic way. And so I'll just run through them relatively briefly. I'm not going to read them all out. They're all available in the outcomes document and in the slides you'll get later. But there's a key point about empowering stakeholders in a meaningful way. So addressing power asymmetries, making sure that people have the information available to involve themselves. That they should involve informed and deliberative discussion among the stakeholders. It isn't just a case of coming to a microphone, reading out a 2-second statement and then walking off again. It needs to be a meaningful conversation. There's a real intent to strive to treat all stakeholders fairly and equitably, considering their needs, capacities, realities, and vulnerabilities. And that one is important because there's a lot of reference in the internet governance world about respective roles and responsibilities. And one of the key things that we said in the outcome document for NETmundial is that that has to be interpreted flexibly. It depends on the issue. It also depends a bit on the interests of the stakeholders. We don't want to see some template from 30 years ago just applied always the same way to have someone else decide what our interests may be as stakeholders. So I think it's just important to really highlight that. If we could go to the next slide. There are some more guidelines. There's obviously the respect for the rule of law and human rights principles. There's the need to foster linguistic diversity of participants, and writing things in ways that are accessible, I think, is a part of that. There's the upholding of accountability and transparency, including for human rights, where all parties have some sort of a role. We're saying that the processes should be agile and adaptable to the process. And sometimes that might mean novel gatherings of stakeholders to tackle new issues. It isn't always the case that every existing institution can solve all of the problems that have emerged or the opportunities that have arisen since they were formed. There's the point about resolving conflicts. They need to be in place because in the end, you can't have a situation where a single actor can derail a process. And where conflict emerges, it's good to have things in place thought through in advance about how to deal with it. Collaboration across borders, the sustainability of the outcomes for both sustainable development and human rights, the need for true capacity development to equip affected or impacted communities to engage in stakeholder dialogues and multi-stakeholder work is important. Making sure that whatever the process is that these are being applied to, they connect effectively with the other governance fora and processes. So that's a call to avoid the creation of silos or to add some countervailing pressure to draw together these governance debates instead of the fragmentation that we've been seeing in some ways. And that collaboration really ought to be focused on outcomes that can solve the problems, really. It's not, the multi-stakeholder environment isn't just there for a nice conversation. It should be leading to some successful action in the world. So those are the sort of principles that underline the guidelines. And then there's a set of process steps that kind of provide a start to finish model of how you could apply that work. So there's being clear about what the issue is that's going to be considered, so that the stakeholders can make an informed decision about whether to take part. Making sure you identify them and engage them, that there's information that's shared, that people are attentive to the various diversities, capacities, interests, and make sure that the participation in the process is equitable. If we move on. I haven't memorized them, so I can't tell you what number 6 is until it appears for me. Facilitating open dialogue, so providing a sort of environment where people can build enough trust to say what they really think about the issues. The importance of having a draft outcome for people to respond and react to, rather than just having a conversation and presenting something that's finished. Broadening the feedback, having open decision making, making sure that there is a chance for people to react, and if the process has not met the needs of the communities who will be affected by it, to hear that. It's number 10. Making sure that there's implementation capability as part of the discussion. I don't know if any of you have been part of processes where implementation is seen as an afterthought, and that's usually a big problem for the people who are expected to implement whatever it is. And then number 12 is to monitor the progress, to be attentive to what the actual impact has been, and to adjust if required. I can't remember if there's another one or if that's the 12.
No, that's the last slide on the guidelines. So
let me just wrap that. But I know I've talked a lot with all that content to present. Please read them if you haven't, and in your organization, in the organizations you're participants in, think about whether you can apply them. And it doesn't matter if they've got the label or not of the São Paulo guidelines. It does matter that we have this sort of distillation of insight about how to do this work applied as broadly as possible. So that would be my encouragement. And I think that we're going to get a contribution later about one way that these guidelines will be held and promoted in the future. So I'll wrap with that and hand it back to you, Lars.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, exactly. So this is a segue to the next question that we would like to discuss, and where we would also like to open the floor for discussion also with the attendees, is what is the input of those guidelines on other ongoing processes that Lisa already mentioned. So that we have the IGF, that we have the Global Digital Compact, WSIS+20, and also other processes. And maybe the other speakers would like to add to this aspect as well. And I've seen on the participants that we have Wolfgang Kleinwächter with us. And Wolfgang, I've seen your comment in the chat. So maybe you would also like to speak briefly about the importance of these guidelines that you already mentioned on the chat. So Wolfgang, at my end, your microphone is open.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, my point is that the substance from NETmundial, which will survive the day-to-day reporting, are the guidelines. And we have now for the first time criteria. What is our understanding of the multi-stakeholder process? So, and my concrete proposals, which what I have here written in my comment, is that the next step would be to develop a system of measurement where we can evaluate digital processes. So that means if we go into the various processes, not only the IGF and the Digital Global Compact or the WSIS plus 20, but negotiations, other digital policy processes, as on cybersecurity, let's say the open-ended working group, on cybercrime, on digital trade, on human rights. So that means we can check now and then conclude whether these processes have a high level of multi-stakeholder engagement or a low level of cyber engagement. So the effect would be something like we know from former times about shaming and naming, because a lot of governments use multi-stakeholder as a lip service and say we do multi-stakeholder, but the reality is that is just a joke. If you look at the consultations governments organized on the Global Digital Compact. So that means with these guidelines, we have now an instrument in our hands where we can measure and can evaluate and can stakeholder. This is something like naming and shaming and can organize a certain pressure to governments. Thank you. Back to you, Lars.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. Jeanette, we have multiple hands. Jeanette, you're the first one.
Thank you. Building on what Wolfgang just said, I thought that one of the weaknesses of the first NETmundial process was indeed that there was no formal follow-up process building on what had been decided. And I think it would be good if the Brazilians decided to institutionalize a bit by, for example, creating a repository that would include experiences with applying the guidelines, but also suggestions for reformulating or sort of modifying them. In the guidelines, as we formulated them, there are also some weaknesses. We didn't have enough time to sort of create a perfect document. So it is understood by the people who agreed on the text more of a rolling document that needs, that would benefit from improvement. So a repository could actually collect proposals to that effect. If I can mention one that still aches me a bit, this sort of that multi-stakeholderism should follow rule of law. I find that a very problematic one, and that was also acknowledged when we discussed it, but we lacked the time to actually come up with a better formulation. So there are quite a lot of things where future work would actually do good for the guidelines, and the repository would a way of collecting such ideas and concrete proposals.
Thank you, Jeanette. Bruna.
Thanks, Lars. Yeah, also adding up to the discussion, it will be really relevant to see how CGIBR will take on the recommendations being done by community, how they have been mapping all the receptiveness around the document and so on. But I also think that perhaps the IGF has also a relevant role in what could be a follow-up in that, as we have highlighted in the text that the IGF could be the depository of some of the guidelines and the recommendations in the document, right? The document in itself, as Wolfgang was saying, like highlights a lot of things that should be taken into account throughout those processes that might seem a little bit silly, such as have draft recommendations issued ahead of time for people to be informed of the discussions. But it also talks about transparency and equitable participation and a balanced like level of discussion for everyone. And unfortunately, that's not the case if we look at processes such as the GDC, who have been intendedly or might have intendedly or unintendedly excluded some stakeholder groups from the debate throughout the history. So it's really important to see how things will settle along all of those groups. And I would say that here, like having some colleagues from the IGF space like Lisa, Jordan, that we have this role as well of taking these discussions to the MAG, to the leadership panel and IGF secretariats, and also addressing how the role of a depository of the guidelines could actually function and what would that role be, just so we can ensure that it's not just CGI doing the follow-up, but also the IGF taking its leadership role really in this space to continue the debate. That would be my addition.
Thank you. And so next we have Anna, and then we also have a hand from Lisa.
Yes, so I think that I would like to highlight that this process is to feed in the multilateral discussions, the ongoing multilateral discussions of the GDC. So the GDC, the way that the GDC is being discussed, it launched like a movement from the different stakeholders that we want to be involved. It's not only by consultation, because at the end we cannot perceive where our proposals were inserted. So this lack of accountability, because it's not because on the side of the GDC there are all the contributions made that we have transparency, because nobody has really the time to read all those inputs. And so it was more to understand how the different stakeholders are really giving input for the discussion. And then we have the problem of the governments, because governments, well, we have democratic governments and we have non-so-democratic governments. But besides that, with different governments that we are having, and we know that this year we'll have different or lots of general election. So there is no, it's difficult for the new members of the government to understand what multi-stakeholder is. Of course, in their minds, in democratic regions, it's normal that they will understand in an easier way what we are talking about. But in other countries, may not be so easy. What I think we feel is that in intergovernmental organizations, and as the CSTD, as a functional body of ECOSOC, it's very difficult to include all these principles, because we have different governments there that will not accept this kind of rules. But there was this worldwide movement of NETmundial+10. So it's very important to have these bottom-up events, because even if they don't have an effective outcome in the month that in 6 months or 1 year, they will have an effect after some time, because the different stakeholders will continue to put a lot of pressure on these principles, and these principles are the principles to discuss in multilateral environment. So I think that to highlight, underline this component of these principles, the São Paulo guidelines, are very. It's very important to give some it comes from the common sense, it comes from the bottom-up approaches, but it gives a guidance to governments, and that is the side that I'm with now. And I know it's very difficult, but still it's very good to say this was a bottom-up document. We were involved, and it has to have an effect, if not in the short term, it will have an effect in the long term. But we will have the decision of the Global Digital Compact in the very short term. So let's see what can be done, but mostly what can be done after the GDC and the WSIS +20 review. Over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. Lise, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I must say I agree with Jeanette's idea of a repository. I think it's important. I think then I agree with Bruno saying this should be IGF, because IGF is there on a yearly basis. We need to embrace it. We need to work with it further. So no statement is perfect, or no guidelines are perfect, because it was done under extreme time pressure. But I'm very proud and very impressed by the outcome of this process. I think it was a strong process. I would like also to recommend that, of course, we need to, and we have all the responsibilities of implementing, of highlighting, of trying to push these guidelines out in the wider society. But I also think it's important that we, every 10th year, take this opportunity to reassess how are we doing? Should we improve? And I like that the NETmundial was not, this was done in NETmundial in Brazil and not in the IGF, because it's a different stakeholder groups are joining us. So it's not the same old as IGF is every year. So I kind of like that we took it out. We looked at how is the process itself doing, and then push it back to IGF and say, now you run with it. But again, agree both with Wolfgang and others, we need to make sure this is happening all over in many of the processes that are important for all the stakeholders. Thank you. And sorry, I need to drop off now. Sorry for that.
Thank you very much for being with us. So safe travels. And Jordan, you also raised your hand.
All right. Sorry about the delay. Yeah, I mean, NETmundial was really important and timely now because there had been no other way to have a proper multi-stakeholder discussion on the governance system in a timeframe that allowed it to have any input or impact on the GDC negotiations. We'd kind of slightly missed the boat because there was nothing to discuss at the IGF last year. And then by the time of the IGF this year, there was nothing that could be done. So I guess it was valuable because it was meeting a need for the multi-stakeholder community that would not otherwise be met. I agree with the follow-up plans that are being discussed for the guidelines, but I think I would caution about trying to turn the occasional event of the NETmundial process into an ongoing, permanent, regular process. I think it's more valuable if it meets a particular need of the times. That's my perspective.
Thank you very much, Jordan. And I just change the slide because we also put together a brief timeline on the next steps that are ahead in the internet governance space that we also already mentioned multiple times during the webinar, and that you have them in the slide deck after the webinar when we send the documentation. You also already briefly touched upon our final question that we would like to discuss, and maybe this is also something that Wolfgang would like to chime in, is so how could a follow-up to NETmundial look like? Lisa already mentioned maybe in 10 years again. Maybe some people think that it is too far in the future. What is your perspective on how can we move on with NETmundial, and how should it look like? And Wolfgang, if you would like to chime in, please raise your hand, and then we can also include you. Yes, Wolfgang, please.
I think this is another good moment for small steps, not for big jumps. So that means we will have a strategy, or we need a strategy for the next 5 to 10 years. I fully agree. So, and there are some dates like 2030 when the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations has been discussed and has probably to be united with the WSIS action lines. I think this was one debate now in the WSIS forum in Geneva, how to bring the Sustainable Development Goals together with the WSIS action lines. The world beyond 2030 will be a digital world, and probably we need then digital development goals, as the DDGs and not SDGs. So, but this has to be discussed during WSIS plus 2025. So, but for me now, the next steps is really more implementation. That means there is no need for new instruments, new institutions. We have everybody already. The architecture is there. So the house is built. So what we have now to discuss is, how we can implement what we have decided. And in so, some reporting processes, if we start some reporting processes, evaluation. So, and we have the benchmarks now. That's why my proposal is to encourage GigaNet. This is the group of academics. They have 200-300 academics. So if we encourage them to develop a research program or something like that, and to go into details, how the São Paulo guidelines and this would be the next small step, and then let's wait and see what will be the outcome from WSIS plus 20 if we have a renewed or extended IGF plus. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Is there anything that others would like to add to this? Anna, please.
Yes, I think that Wolfgang explained very well the role of the academic community here. And the more we will have this kind of benchmarks, assessment of the implementation, etc., the easier will be for the politicians to understand what is going on, and that they have to have in mind when they take a decision that we really need this kind of multi-stakeholder model to follow. And it's not only it's not only for internet, as I usually say. It's for the environment, it's for ocean, and it's even for war. I hope that in 10 years, 20 years, it will be really a bottom-up approach when we have war in the world, because with different stakeholders, maybe it will be a different way of shaping decisions for war.
Thank you, Anna. We are reaching the top of the hour. Do we have any further comments or questions from the floor? I don't see any. So you don't have to wait until you get the follow-up email with the slides. So if you want to learn more about NETmundial, the guidelines, this multi-stakeholder statement document you can download, you can find all the information on the website netmundial.br. We reached the top of the hour. With this, I would like to thank to our speakers, Anna, Bruna, Jeanette, Jordan and Lisa have already dropped off. Also, Wolfgang, thank you for your active participation. Also, thank you for all the attendees to join us this morning. And I hope this was very useful to get you up to speed on NETmundial and how it relates to the other processes in the internet governance space. And with this, I wish you a very nice and successful rest of the day. And this meeting is adjourned.